When I was asked to speak about the Patriot Academy, quite frankly, I had no idea where to begin. You saw the video. There was a lot of stuff that you could reach from. For example, all the fellowship that you had, meeting with other people that had your same conservative values. But when you put it into context, that the wonderful, great Congressman Louie Gohmert was going to be here, I knew exactly what I was going to talk about.
Run for Senate.
Balls. More specifically, golf balls. You see, the minute you check into the Patriot Academy, you are given a golf ball and are told that that golf ball represents your character. The concept is absolutely brilliant. The Patriot Academy recognizes that so many people get to Washington and forget their character. But that's definitely not our lovable Louie Gohmert, is it? No, it's not. We don't even have to worry about him losing his character. Neither do we have to worry about anybody coming out of the Patriot Academy losing theirs. The Patriot Academy teaches great morals, great Christian morals, and teaches you to instill them within our government. We are a government of the people, by the people, for the people, one nation, under God.
Amen.
Let's keep it that.
Even when you really don't have much to fight with, you can still fight. And, you know, some of y'all know about Dick Dalling. Deb and I were talking about Dick Dalling this week on the House floor. Except for the commander of this little group of 40 or so, Dick Dalling was a bartender. So, I wondered about that. He was essential. But anyway, they heard there were thousands, after every able-bodied Texan that could fight headed towards Shreveport, they heard that there were thousands of Union forces coming by ship. And their strategy, and they said it had even been worked out with Lincoln, they were going to come up through Sabine Pass and take the area around the Sabine Lake, Beaumont, Port Arthur, and from there, with that as a stronghold, they'd be able to take Houston and knock out Galveston, and they would be able to head up the Sabine River that was navigable back then. And there was one main long railroad that came straight north from Houston, and East Texas is where they were growing crops, and they actually were supplying much of the Southern Army. And the strategy was really a pretty good one. You cut off the Sabine River, you take that railroad, they don't get any more supplies, and this was toward the end of the Civil War. And these guys decided when they heard they may die, but they are not going down without a fight. And these guys went out and took over the earthen fort at Sabine Pass. It was more narrow then than it is now, and it wasn't real deep there, but ships came through, and there were thousands of Union troops out on ships that were just off the coast, and they saw activity around the fort there at the pass. They didn't know how many were in there. They had 6 cannons that they had brought out that were so heavy you couldn't adjust them during a fight. The only way is to shovel dirt out from under them. But you couldn't get dirt under them in the middle of a fight. So you could lower them, but you couldn't raise them. And you couldn't swing them side to side. And they positioned those 6, the people that didn't go to Shreveport. The people went to Shreveport, they took everything they could. So they've had about 5 handguns, and they had 6 cannons. And those guys, because they went out there was one guy that came along, they got a message, he was a doctor, got a message from the general at Shreveport that said, we hear the Union forces are coming in overwhelming numbers, go ahead and abandon the fort, you can't do anything. And they decided, well, they were going to die trying. And so the doctor brought the message out, ordering Dick Dalling and his men to leave the fort, to just escape, really. And they thought, we're going to protect East Texas. We are not going to, because they might try to do something like Sherman did and just, have a scorched earth policy. They didn't know. But they knew that there were 40 or so of them, and they could make some difference, and they would fight to the death. They were planning on having their own Alamo if they had to. Well, the Union forces sent 4 ships up because they were afraid it was an ambush. And Dalling, before they got there, had target practice, and they put a stake up in shallow water on either end that was as far left and right as they could shoot. And he said, you do not shoot until we get as many in between those poles sticking up in the water as we can get, and then we'll fire. And so they waited, and one of the diaries of one of the sailors said that the captain on their ship said, it looks like there's activity at the cannons. What do you think that means? And the other said, I think we're about to find out. And boom, one ship got through. Well, it depends on which version you read, but it seemed like a pretty authoritative version. Had one ship getting through, another, they hit the rudder, broke the rudder, it went aground, so the others couldn't get by. And so the one that got through thought it was an ambush, comes back and tries to go back through. They clog up Sabine Pass, and they're just pounding them because they're between the 2 poles. And they ended up, the other ships saw the ambush, saw the ships being pummeled. One of the boiler units got hit, and scalding water went up all over a bunch of the soldiers, and they were jumping, and people were abandoning ship. There were hundreds and hundreds of livestock that were thrown overboard trying to lighten the load, and carcasses weren't washed up for weeks. And so the ships, they had 5,000 there, and there were 20,000 supposedly that were coming behind them. Those 40 to 45 guys held their ground. The only casualty, one guy's hand was burned to the bone because they kept loading the cannon so fast without slowing down, because they knew they were fighting to the death. But nobody was killed. That was the worst injury, burning a hand to the bone, because they gave it everything they had. And the other ships fled, and they never came back. And then they had the real problem. Over 800 men who had not been killed were coming ashore to surrender. So Dalling, thinking quickly, he tells five guys to take the 5 rifles they have and stand up on the earthen wall, and sent the other 35 over without any arms at all, and accept all the rifles and stack them up. And they did, and they marched over 800 prisoners up through Port Arthur and Beaumont and locked them in everything they could find that would lock securely. And it wasn't until the next day that over 800 sailors, soldiers, found out they'd been captured by 40 guys. And seriously, historians have said it's probably the greatest naval victory in the history of the world. Seriously. Now, there is a point. I know that Huffington Post and others think I have no point. But when you are willing to fight to the death, to give it absolutely everything you have, you may just win. Because if you are more committed than the people that are fighting you, you've got a chance to win. Now, we just had a shutdown, and Harry Reid and President Obama made clear all along, we're not negotiating. And if you were not sure if they really meant it, then the night of the shutdown, after we had done a number of things, first, leading up to it, we had passed a military pay bill to make sure the military got paid in the event of the shutdown. I had been pushing pushed for that since February of 2011, when it became apparent that our military were going to be used as pawns in a game to try to get people to vote for a bad CR. And we filed the bill back then and couldn't get our speaker to bring it to the floor. And so we've been pushing since, and I'm very grateful this time the speaker allowed it to come to the floor, and it passed. And then the Senate felt scared not to pass it. They passed it, and went to President Desi, signed it before the shutdown ever started. Now, some people have said, well, why would you pass a bill that completely eliminates Obamacare? Well, the answer is simple. We believe it's terrible for America. Why wouldn't we pass that bill? So yeah, so Larry Reid and the president, Reid wasn't even going to take it up. But then the next bill we sent down suspended Obamacare for a year. I mean, is there anybody in the country besides the Democrats in the Senate and a couple of Republicans in the Senate and the president that thinks Obamacare is ready to go right now? It is not. So why wouldn't it have been fair to say, okay, we'll give you an out and save face, we will suspend it for a year. And I know y'all have had the conversations, I've talked to some of y'all about it. We were in a tough dilemma. There's a real dichotomy there. On the one hand, there are some people that say, just let it go, it'll fail on its own, and so why not just let it go? Well, that is true, it will fall on its own, but the Soviet Union was destined to fall.
That's right.
But think of the tens of millions of people that died. Think of all the freedoms that were taken away from people for around 70 plus years. And I'm one of those who believes that Reagan, by the stand he took and being aggressive and coming up to him, I think he saved 20 years of liberty for people that wouldn't have had it maybe in their lifetime. Yeah. But by standing up and brought it to the street. Now, I really believe Obamacare is going to fail, but it may be 70 years. And there are already people, like one of my staff's fathers was told, we're not going to be able to get your pacemaker in by the end of the year, and under the new rules coming into effect under the Affordable Care Act on January 1st, you're not eligible for a pacemaker after January 1st. Well, now folks, if you paid attention, that should not have come as a surprise.